Patricia Williams sat in the funeral director's office, staring at numbers that made no sense. $8,500 for a basic funeral service. Her husband, James, had died 3 days ago from a heart attack. He was only 42 years old. They had 2 kids, ages 7 and 9. No life insurance because they couldn't afford the monthly payments. Patricia worked 2 jobs just to keep their small apartment in Tucson, Arizona. James had been a mechanic at a local shop, working 60 hours a week to make ends meet. Now he was gone and Patricia had exactly $1,200 in their bank account. The funeral director, a man named Gerald Thompson, looked at her with practiced sympathy. He explained that $8,500 was the absolute minimum for a dignified service. Casket, embalming, burial plot, headstone. It all added up fast. Patricia's hands shook as she signed papers for a cremation instead. The cheapest option, $2,800. She'd have to borrow money from her sister, who barely had any herself. There would be no viewing, no service, no chance for James's friends to say goodbye. Just ashes in a simple urn. Before we continue, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. Patricia left the funeral home feeling like she'd failed her husband one last time. James deserved better than this. He'd worked his whole life, helped everyone who asked, never complained. And she couldn't even give him a proper funeral. She sat in her car in the parking lot and cried until she couldn't breathe. Her phone rang. It was her sister Angela asking if she'd made arrangements. Patricia explained through tears that she'd chosen cremation because it was all she could afford. Angela was quiet for a moment before saying she'd help however she could. Patricia thanked her and hung up. She drove to the auto shop where James had worked for 16 years. His boss, a man named Lou Hernandez, met her at the door. Lou had already heard the news. He handed Patricia an envelope with $800 from the shop employees. Everyone had pitched in what they could. Patricia hugged him and cried again. It helped, but it still wasn't enough for a real funeral. That night, Patricia's 7-year-old daughter asked when Daddy's funeral would be. Patricia didn't know how to explain that there wouldn't be one. Not the kind where people came and told stories and said goodbye properly. She told her daughter they'd have a small family gathering at home instead. The little girl asked if Daddy's motorcycle friend would come. Patricia had forgotten about James's riding buddies. He'd been part of a weekend riding group for the past 5 years. Nothing official, just guys who loved motorcycles and rode together on Sundays. James always came home from those rides smiling, talking about the roads they'd taken and the places they'd seen. Patricia hadn't thought to call any of them. She didn't even know most of their names. James just called them his brothers. The next morning, Patricia heard motorcycles outside her apartment. Lots of them. She looked out the window and saw at least 20 bikes parked on the street. Men in leather vests were getting off their motorcycles and walking toward her building. Patricia panicked, thinking something was wrong. She opened the door before they could knock. A large man with a gray beard stepped forward. His name was Curtis Bear Jackson, and he'd ridden with James every Sunday for 3 years. Bear explained that they'd just heard about James' passing. The shop owner, Lou, had called one of the riders who spread the word. Patricia invited them inside, but 20 bikers couldn't fit in her small apartment. They stood in the hallway and on the stairs instead. Bear asked about funeral arrangements. Patricia's voice broke as she explained she could only afford cremation. No service, no gathering, nothing that honored who James was. The bikers looked at each other. Bear pulled out his phone and made a call. He spoke quietly for a few minutes, then hung up. He told Patricia not to worry about anything. James's brothers would handle it. Patricia didn't understand what he meant. Bear explained that James was family to them. They took care of their own. Within 3 hours, 40 more bikers had arrived at Patricia's apartment complex. 60 total. Some were from James's regular riding group. Others were from different clubs who'd heard a rider needed help. Bikers from the Desert Riders, the Iron Patriots, the Road Guardians, and the Christian Motorcyclist Association all showed up. They gathered in the parking lot, while Patricia watched from her window in disbelief. Bear came back upstairs with an envelope. Inside was $12,000 in cash. Every biker had contributed what they could. Some gave $50. Others gave $500. It added up fast when 60 people decided to help. If you believe bikers are the most generous people, hit that subscribe button and show your support. Patricia couldn't speak. She just stared at the money in her hands. Bear told her it was enough for a proper funeral. Not just cremation, but a real service with everything James deserved. Patricia cried harder than she'd cried since James died, but these were different tears. Bear wasn't finished. He explained that the bikers would also provide the motorcycle escort for the funeral procession. 60 bikes would ride with James one last time. It would be a send-off worthy of a brother. Patricia hugged Bear and couldn't let go. The funeral happened 4 days later at Riverside Memorial Chapel in Tucson. The viewing was Thursday evening. Over 200 people showed up. Friends, family, co-workers, and 60 bikers in their leather vests. James's casket was surrounded by flowers that the bikers had also paid for. The service was Friday morning. Patricia's daughters wore new black dresses that Angela had bought with money the bikers had sent her. The chapel was packed. Every seat filled. People standing in the back. The pastor spoke about James's kindness and work ethic. Lou from the auto shop told stories about James always being the first to help and the last to leave. Then Bear stood up. The big biker walked to front and talked about riding with James every Sunday. How James never missed a ride unless his kids had something important. How he always checked on everyone's bikes before they left. How he'd once ridden through a thunderstorm to help a stranded rider he didn't even know. Bear's voice cracked when he said James was the kind of man who made everyone around him better. The chapel was silent except for people crying. After the service, 60 motorcycles lined up outside. The hearse pulled out first, followed by Patricia's car with her daughters. Then 60 bikers in perfect formation, engines rumbling in unison, a thunder that shook the ground. They rode through Tucson with police escort. Traffic stopped. People on sidewalks put their hands over their hearts. Some saluted. Others filmed on their phones. The procession lasted 40 minutes, ending at the cemetery. At the graveside, the bikers formed a circle around James's casket. Bear presented Patricia with a flag that had been carried on every bike in the procession. It was signed by all 60 riders. He also gave her a leather vest patch that read, "Forever Brother." It was James's now, to be buried with him. The burial was beautiful and dignified, and everything Patricia couldn't have afforded alone. After everyone left, Patricia stood by the grave with her daughters. The girls placed flowers on their father's casket. Patricia whispered thank you to the bikers who'd given James the send-off he deserved. 3 months later, Patricia received an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a check for $5,000 and a note for the girls' education from James's brothers. Patricia never found out which biker sent it. She suspected it was Bear, but he denied it every time she asked. Today, Patricia's daughters are 10 and 12. They wear small motorcycle pendant necklaces that Bear gave them. Every Sunday, if the weather's good, Bear and a few riders stop by Patricia's apartment. They check if she needs anything, fix things around the apartment, make sure she's okay. Patricia calls them her guardian angels. Last month was the 2-year anniversary of James's death. 60 bikers showed up at the cemetery. They stood in silence around his grave for 20 minutes. Then they started their engines and revved them in unison. A final salute to their fallen brother. Patricia brought her daughters. The girls weren't scared of the loud engines. They smiled because they knew their dad's friends were saying hello. Bear told Patricia that James would never be forgotten. Not by his brothers. Not by his club. Not by anyone who rides. Because that's what real brotherhood means. You take care of each other in life. And you take care of each other's families when they're gone. Subscribe to this channel if you believe bikers have the biggest hearts.